A cowboy saved two Apache girls. 15 years later, they returned and made an unthinkable decision. The sun had just begun to climb above the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the wide, open plains of the American Southwest. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. Luke Harrison, a tall, rugged cowboy with a weathered face and strong hands, was already up. He had been riding the same trails for years, knowing every rock, every bend of the river, and every hidden path through the canyons near his small ranch. Life had been quiet, simple, and honest, filled with early mornings, hard work, and nights spent under the stars, listening to the soft whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. On this particular morning, Luke's horse, a strong chestnut named Dusty, seemed restless. Luke noticed it first when Dusty's ears twitched forward, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Something was not right. The cowboy had a sharp eye and an even sharper instinct. Years of experience had taught him that the land spoke in its own way, through the rustling of leaves, the movement of animals, and even the sound of water. Today, the land was speaking urgently. Luke adjusted his hat and urged Dusty toward the river, which wound like a silver ribbon through the plains. The water usually ran gently, reflecting the morning light, but today it roared and churned violently. Heavy rains had fallen upstream, and a flash flood was moving faster than anyone could predict. That was when he first saw them, two young girls struggling against the current, clinging to each other, their small faces pale with fear. The sight struck Luke like a bolt of lightning. He could see the terror in their eyes, the way they fought to stay afloat while the water threatened to drag them away. Without hesitation, he spurred Dusty into action. The horse splashed through shallow parts of the river, careful not to lose footing on the slippery rocks. Luke's heart pounded, but he kept his mind focused. Panic would not help these girls. Only calm action, strength, and courage could save them. As he approached, he realized just how small and fragile they were. Their clothing was soaked and torn, clinging to their bodies. The older of the two, perhaps no more than 10 or 11, tried to shield the younger one, whose sobs were almost drowned by the rushing water. Luke reached out with one strong arm, shouting words of encouragement, telling them to hold on. "I've got you! Hold tight!" His voice cut through the roar of the river, steady and firm. Dusty nickered nervously, but he trusted Luke. Carefully, Luke waded deeper into the water, using the horse as support. One girl's small hand finally grabbed his, and he pulled her close, then reached for the other. The current tugged at him with a force that made his muscles strain and sweat bead on his forehead, but he did not falter. Inch by inch, step by step, he guided them toward the riverbank. Rocks scraped his boots, branches lashed against his arms, and the water slapped his face, but his determination never wavered. Finally, they reached solid ground. Luke dropped to his knees, exhausted but relieved, and wrapped the girls in his coat to warm them. Their teeth chattered, and tears ran freely down their faces, mixing with the mud and water. Luke gently held them, speaking softly, assuring them that they were safe now. The girls looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, unsure if they could trust this stranger. Luke understood that fear too well. Sometimes the hardest part of saving someone wasn't pulling them from danger, it was convincing them that help could be trusted. Over the next few hours, Luke worked to calm them. He gave them water from his canteen and shared the small bread and dried meat he carried for his own meals. He spoke in gentle, simple words, telling them his name and explaining that he meant no harm. He listened as they whispered their names, Yida and Nijoni, and tried to understand their story. They spoke little at first, frightened and wary, but slowly, with patience and care, they began to relax, recognizing that Luke's actions were born of kindness, not selfishness. As the day wore on, Luke realized that the girls' parents were nowhere to be found. He knew the local Apache community lived in small camps scattered across the plains and near the canyons, but with the floodwaters rising, no one could have reached them yet. He made the decision to stay with the girls until he could locate their families. It was not a choice he made lightly. He had responsibilities on his ranch, livestock to tend, and land to manage, but nothing mattered more in that moment than the safety of these children. The afternoon sun climbed higher, turning the river into a torrent of sparkling foam. Luke led the girls to a small, sheltered area under a cluster of juniper trees. He gathered dry grass and set up a temporary camp, making sure they had a safe place to rest. He even fashioned a makeshift cradle for the younger girl, who had been trembling from the cold and shock. Luke had always been resourceful, but this task demanded more than skill. It required compassion, empathy, and a steady heart. While the girls slept, Luke kept watch. He scanned the horizon for any sign of other people, his mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps the elders from the nearby Apache camp were already searching for them. Perhaps the parents were stranded somewhere upstream, just out of sight. Luke prayed silently for their safety, his thoughts always returning to the small hands that had held his so tightly just hours before. Evening came, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. Luke started a small fire to cook some food, careful to keep it contained. The smell of roasting meat and warm bread slowly drew the girls from their sleep. They sat quietly watching him, their eyes wide and filled with a mixture of awe and cautious curiosity. Luke smiled at them gently. "It's okay, you're safe. Eat," he said. And eat they did ravenously, because fear and cold had left them starving. As night fell, Luke wrapped them in blankets and told them stories of the plains, of the animals that roamed free, and of the stars that had watched over generations of cowboys, settlers, and native tribes alike. The girls listened, captivated by his calm voice, their fear slowly giving way to wonder. For the first time that day, they laughed, a small, tentative sound, but a sound that warmed Luke's heart. Though exhausted, Luke stayed awake, his eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the firelight. The plains were beautiful, but also full of hidden dangers, especially after the storm. Wolves, snakes, or even another sudden flood could threaten the girls if he let down his guard. He was determined to protect them, no matter the cost. By the time the moon rose high, Luke had made a plan. At first light, he would ride to the nearest Apache camp, carrying the girls safely in his arms or on Dusty's back if necessary. He knew the elders would be grateful, but he also knew that the girls' trust had to be respected. This was more than a rescue. It was the beginning of a bond, fragile but real, between a cowboy who had risked everything and two children who had seen the kindness of a stranger when they needed it most. Luke sat back, watching the fire die down, feeling the rhythmic breathing of the girls against his chest. He had faced many dangers in his life, storms, wild animals, and harsh winters, but nothing had tested him like this. Saving lives was different from saving cattle or fixing fences. This was personal, emotional, and infinitely more meaningful. He knew that years from now, he might remember this night more clearly than any other, not because of the danger, but because of the connection formed in the quiet moments after fear had passed. He allowed himself a small smile as he felt the girls relax completely, trusting him enough to sleep. Luke understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, finding their family, navigating the tricky terrain, and ensuring the girls' safety. But he also understood that he was ready. This was not just about bravery, it was about heart. And Luke Harrison's heart had room enough for two frightened girls who had been swept up in a flood, but were never going to be swept away from his care. And so, under the vast, starlit sky of the Southwest Plains, a cowboy kept watch, protecting two young lives that fate had thrown into his path. He did not know how long it would take for their families to arrive, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would not let anything happen to them. For the first time in a long time, Luke felt a sense of purpose that went beyond ranching, beyond survival, beyond the ordinary life he had always known. He was part of something greater, a rescue, a promise, a bond that would echo across the years. The days that followed Luke's daring rescue were a mixture of relief, adjustment, and quiet tension. The two young girls, Ita and Najoni, clung to each other and to Luke in a way that showed both gratitude and lingering fear. Although they had survived the violent waters of the flood, the memory of nearly being swept away remained fresh in their minds. Every snap of a twig or rustle of wind made them flinch, and Luke understood that fear like this did not fade overnight. Luke had made a small shelter near the riverbank, using the natural cover of juniper trees and rocks to protect them from the elements. He had never cared for children before, but instinct guided him. He gathered soft grasses to make makeshift beds, and even found small animal hides to keep them warm through the chilly nights. Each morning he would rise early, tending to the riverbank and preparing simple meals: cornbread, dried meat, and water from a nearby spring. The girls watched him, sometimes shyly, sometimes with wide-eyed curiosity. Slowly, a tentative bond began to form, built on small gestures of kindness, gentle words, and patient understanding. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains and painted the sky in streaks of gold and pink, Luke noticed something remarkable. The girls, who had been too scared to speak much, began to open up. Aida, the older of the two, asked him quietly, "Cowboy, what is your name?" Luke smiled, his weathered face softening. "Luke," he said, "and this is Dusty." He patted the horse's neck. The younger girl, Nijoni, peeked from behind her sister, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Luke," she whispered, as if testing the sound of the word, learning that it belonged to someone she could trust. Over the next week, Luke worked to teach them simple survival skills. He showed them how to recognize safe water, how to avoid dangerous plants and snakes, and even how to signal for help. He was careful not to overwhelm them, understanding that trust and courage could not be rushed. Every day was a small step forward, a chance to heal the shock left by the flood. He often spoke of the plains, of the wind and stars, of the animals that roamed freely, and the quiet beauty of nature that surrounded them. The girls listened, absorbing not only the practical lessons, but also a sense of calm that only came from being with someone steady and caring. Despite the growing trust, Luke never ignored the reality of the situation. He knew that the girls' parents or guardians would eventually arrive. The local Apache community lived nearby, and he could not keep the girls indefinitely. But he also knew that, for the moment, they needed him more than anyone else. The thought weighed on him heavily. He felt a responsibility that went beyond duty or kindness. It was a moral and human obligation that tugged at his heart. Then came the day when they heard the distant sound of voices. At first, it was just faint shouting carried by the wind, but soon it became unmistakable. Luke's heart quickened. The girl's eyes widened, and Nijoni clung to Aida as the sound grew nearer. Luke quickly stood, waving and calling out, hoping to guide the approaching people safely. The voices belonged to a small group of elders from the Apache community. They had come searching for the girls after the flood had washed them away, guided by the trail Luke had left, and the word-of-mouth warnings from neighbors who had seen the water rise. The reunion was emotional. The elders, wise and solemn, took in the scene. The two girls, dirty and tired but alive, wrapped in Luke's coat, and the cowboy himself, weathered but calm. There was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet astonishment in their eyes. One of the elders stepped forward and spoke in a gentle, formal tone, praising Luke for his courage and quick thinking. He explained that the girls had been found just in time, and that without his intervention, the outcome could have been tragic. Luke felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also a tug of sadness. He had grown attached to the girls in ways he had not expected. Aida and Nijoni, though happy to see their elders, were reluctant to leave Luke. Their small hands gripped his tightly, as if letting go meant risking the safety and warmth they had come to trust. Luke knelt down, meeting their eyes. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "They're your family. They've been looking for you. But remember, I'll always be here if you ever need me." The girls nodded, but the tears in their eyes betrayed the pain of leaving someone who had become their protector. Over the next few days, Luke helped the elders prepare for the journey back to their village. He packed provisions, guided them through safe paths, and made sure the girls were comfortable for the trip. The elders, recognizing his care and dedication, expressed their gratitude repeatedly. They spoke of how rare it was to find someone willing to risk their life for children not their own, and how Luke's actions had not only saved lives, but also strengthened the bonds between the communities. The night before the departure, Luke sat by the fire with the girls one last time. He told them stories of cowboys and explorers, of the vast plains and the hidden canyons that stretched for miles. He spoke of courage and kindness, of the importance of helping those in need, and of never giving up even when the odds seemed impossible. Aida and Nijoni listened, absorbing every word, their young minds trying to hold on to the feeling of safety and belonging they had discovered with him. Luke knew that parting would not be easy. He had spent every waking moment for the past weeks thinking about their safety, teaching them and sharing small joys, like gathering wild berries, watching the sunset, and listening to the night sounds of the plains. The connection they had formed was not superficial. It was a bond forged in trust, courage, and shared hardship. Letting them go was both a relief and a sorrow, a bittersweet mixture that left Luke feeling more human than he had in years. The morning of the departure arrived with a soft, misty light. Dusty waited patiently, the girls' small packs tied carefully on his back. Luke helped them climb on, making sure they were secure. He gave Ita a gentle hug, then Nijoni, and whispered words of encouragement. Remember, be brave, be kind, and never forget what you've learned. You can always find your way just like you did here. The girls nodded, their faces shining with tears and gratitude. They waved as the elders led them down the trail, and Luke watched until they disappeared from sight, leaving only footprints in the soft soil. Once the girls were gone, Luke returned to his ranch, feeling a strange emptiness. The plains seemed quieter, lonelier, yet somehow fuller, as if their presence had left an invisible mark on the land itself. He spent the day tending to his horses and chores, but his mind often drifted back to the two young lives he had touched. He wondered how they would grow, what challenges they would face, and whether they would remember him years from now. Deep down, he hoped they would, but he knew that the most important thing was that they were safe, and that their bond, though tested by distance, would endure in memory and spirit. In the weeks that followed, Luke occasionally saw signs that the girls were doing well. The elders sent word of their safe return to the village, and sometimes, when passing through town, neighbors would mention seeing two young Apache girls who spoke of a kind cowboy who had saved them. Luke listened quietly, a smile tugging at his lips. He did not need accolades or thanks. The knowledge that he had made a difference was reward enough. Yet, somewhere deep in his heart, he felt the beginnings of a connection that would not fade with time, an invisible thread linking him to Ita and Nijoni, stretching across the years, ready to be woven again when the time came. Life gradually returned to its ordinary rhythm for Luke, yet the experience had changed him. He was more aware of the fragility of life, the importance of courage, and the profound impact a single act of kindness could have. He continued his work on the ranch, but he did so with a quiet pride and a renewed sense of purpose. Though the girls were back with their families, Luke knew that he had left a lasting impression on their lives, just as they had left one on his. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the plains, that bond waited, patient and unbroken, for the day it would be tested and strengthened once more. 15 years had passed since Luke Harrison had rescued Ida and Nijoni from the rushing river. The plains of the Southwest had changed only slightly over the years, but Luke had changed more than he could measure. Time had left its marks on his face, etching lines around his eyes and deepening the grooves in his weathered hands. His hair had grayed, though his strong frame remained steady and capable. Life on the ranch continued much as it always had, early mornings, long hours in the saddle, tending to cattle and repairing fences, but the quiet had deepened. The days were predictable, the nights filled with stars, and Luke often found himself lost in thought, remembering the two small girls who had once trusted him with their lives. Luke sometimes wondered what had become of Ida and Nijoni. He had heard stories from passing travelers or neighbors who visited the village near the river, but nothing concrete. The girls had grown up in the care of their community, strong, resilient, and proud of their heritage. Luke imagined that Ita, the older and more thoughtful of the two, had grown into a leader, someone wise and confident. And Nijoni, sweet and quiet, must have become brave in her own way, facing life's challenges with determination and courage. The thought warmed him and left a small ache in his chest, a longing to see them again, to know that the lives he had saved had flourished. It was late spring when the first sign of change arrived. Luke was fixing a fence along the eastern edge of his property, his sleeves rolled up against the sun, when Dusty pricked his ears and whinnied softly. Luke looked up to see movement in the distance, a pair of figures walking steadily toward the ranch. At first he thought it might be travelers or neighbors, but as the figures drew closer, a strange feeling stirred in him. Something about the way they walked, the way they held themselves, seemed familiar, though he could not place it. His heart began to beat faster, a combination of curiosity, caution, and something deeper, unspoken. As they reached the ranch, Luke realized with a sudden clarity that he was looking at two young women, grown tall and strong, with features he remembered from so long ago. Their hair was dark, their eyes bright, and their expressions carried a mix of determination and apprehension. Luke's breath caught. Could it really be them, Ida and Nijoni, the two girls he had rescued so many years ago? His mind raced through memories, the river, the fear in their eyes, the small hands that had clutched his coat as he carried them to safety. It was impossible, yet here they were, standing before him, 15 years older but unmistakably the same. The reunion was quiet at first. The women approached slowly, unsure of how to act after all the years. Luke dismounted Dusty and stepped forward, his voice steady but soft. "Ita Nijoni?" he asked, almost in disbelief. The women paused, then nodded. "Luke," Ita said, her voice calm but emotional. "It's been a long time." Nijoni's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she managed a small smile. The connection was immediate, like a bridge stretched across the years, unbroken by time or distance. Luke invited them to sit by the porch, and the four of them talked long into the afternoon. The women shared stories of their childhood, the challenges they had faced growing up, and the lessons they had learned from their community and families. Luke listened, amazed by their courage and resilience. The hardships they had endured did not break them. Instead, they had become stronger, wiser, and more determined. He felt pride swell in his chest, not as a boast, but as a deep, quiet satisfaction that the lives he had touched had flourished in ways he could never have imagined. Ita spoke first, describing how the memory of that day at the river had shaped her life. She told Luke how the act of bravery, witnessing someone risk everything for strangers, had inspired her to be brave herself. She had learned that courage was not just about facing danger, but about standing up for others, helping those in need, and trusting in oneself. Nijoni, shy but equally expressive, shared her gratitude for Luke's calm presence. She explained how, even in moments of fear and uncertainty, she had carried the memory of his steady voice and strong hands as a source of comfort and courage. Luke was moved beyond words. He realized that the impact of a single act, his decision to risk the river, to fight the current, to protect two frightened children, had rippled through time in ways he could never have predicted. The girls he had saved had grown into women of remarkable strength and character, carrying not only their own dreams, but also the lessons of that fateful day. Luke felt a quiet sense of wonder. Life had a way of surprising him, of bringing unexpected joy and meaning even after years of solitude and routine. As the sun began to dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the conversation took a more serious turn. Ita and Nijoni had not come merely to reminisce. Their eyes were filled with determination, and Luke sensed that something significant was about to be revealed. He leaned forward, curious and cautious, as Ita spoke. "Luke," she began, "we've never forgotten what you did for us, what you risked. It changed our lives. And now we want to give back. We want to make sure your kindness has a lasting impact." Luke's brow furrowed. He did not understand fully what they meant, but the sincerity in their voices made him lean in closer. Nijoni added softly, "We've worked hard these past years. We've learned, we've saved, and now we want to use what we have to help you and others. We want to do something meaningful, something that will honor the courage you showed us." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the words settling over them like a quiet, powerful presence. Luke felt a mixture of curiosity, pride, and a little apprehension. He had spent his life alone on the ranch, focused on survival, hard work, and quiet reflection. The idea that these two women, once small, terrified children, had returned with a purpose that involved him was both surprising and deeply moving. He realized that the connection they shared was more than memory. It was a bond of trust, gratitude, and shared humanity. For the rest of the evening, they spoke about the past and the future. Ita and Nijoni explained their plans slowly, carefully, ensuring Luke understood that it was born not of obligation, but of genuine desire to give back. They had seen the good Luke had done, not only for them but for the land, the animals, and anyone in need, and they wanted to extend that goodness further. Luke listened, heart swelling with emotion. He could see the thoughtfulness in their expressions, the strength in their voices, and the determination in their eyes. As the night grew darker, the stars emerging one by one in the vast southwestern sky, Luke felt a deep sense of anticipation. He realized that life had brought him to this moment not by chance, but by a chain of choices, small and significant, that had led to this reunion. 15 years of quiet life, reflection, and solitary labor had prepared him to witness something extraordinary. He could not yet see the full picture of what Ita and Nijoni had planned, but he knew it would be meaningful, and that it would honor the courage and kindness that had first brought them together. The three of them watched the fire dim to embers, listening to the wind move across the plains. Dusty shifted gently nearby, sensing the calm yet expectant energy in the air. Luke felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the lives we touch, even for a brief moment, can return to us in ways that are profound and unexpected. The girls he had rescued so many years ago had returned not only as adults, but as bearers of hope, gratitude, and ambition. As they prepared to leave for the night, Aita and Nijoni promised to return the next day with more details. Luke nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and humility. He had spent his life on the ranch, accustomed to solitude and self-reliance, but now he was part of a story that reached far beyond the fences of his land. 15 years after that life-changing day at the river, the bond between them had been rekindled, stronger and more meaningful than ever. Luke went to bed that night with a heart full of hope and reflection. He thought about the river, the flood, and the small hands that had clung to him so long ago. He thought about the years that had passed, the lessons learned, and the lives touched. And he thought about the future, uncertain yet bright, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary moments in life come not from chance, but from acts of courage, kindness, and trust. As sleep finally came, he dreamed not of solitude or hard work, but of reunion, purpose, and the unexpected ways life rewards those who act with courage and compassion. 15 years after a single brave act, Luke Harrison realized that the plains of the Southwest held not just danger and beauty, but also the power to bring people together to heal and to create bonds that could endure across time and distance. The next morning, the sun rose. Over the plains in a gentle haze, painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber. Luke Harrison had already been up for hours, as was his habit, checking the fences and feeding the livestock. The air smelled of fresh earth and morning dew, carrying the soft sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of wind through the sagebrush. Yet despite the familiar beauty of the plains, Luke felt a strange tension in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. Aita and Nijoni were returning today, and he did not know what to expect. By mid-morning, Dusty pricked his ears and whinnied softly. Luke looked up to see two figures approaching along the dusty trail leading to the ranch. This time, he did not need to wonder who they were. Aita and Nijoni had returned, walking confidently, their steps sure and measured. The years had only strengthened them, their presence commanding and calm. Luke felt a swell of emotion as he dismounted Dusty and walked to greet them. "You're here," he said simply, though his voice carried the weight of surprise, joy, and something deeper. Aita smiled, a quiet, steady smile that seemed to hold years of thought and planning. Nijoni's eyes sparkled with determination and warmth. They had come prepared, carrying only small satchels, yet there was an unmistakable sense of purpose in the way they moved. Luke led them to the porch, where they sat, Dusty resting nearby, the plains stretching endlessly around them. The air was filled with the scent of grass, sun, and the faint trace of smoke from the morning fire. For a moment none of them spoke, simply absorbing the presence of one another, the years, and the land that had witnessed so much. Finally, Aita spoke. "Luke," she began, her voice calm yet deliberate, "we've thought a lot about how to show our gratitude. We've come not just to visit, but to make sure that what you've done for us has meaning beyond that day." Luke listened closely, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He had expected thanks, maybe a story of how their lives had changed, but something in her words hinted at more than just gratitude. Nijoni leaned forward, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "We've worked hard these past years," she said, "learning, saving, and preparing. We want to help you in a way that honors what you did for us. You gave us life when it was almost taken, and we want to give back to make sure that your courage has a lasting impact." Luke felt his heart tighten. He had not imagined such a gesture, not after all this time. The girls he had rescued had grown into women of remarkable determination, and now they were offering something beyond anything he could have expected. The three of them spoke for hours, the conversation flowing easily between memories of the past and ideas for the future. Aita described the work they had done in their community, teaching children, helping families in need, and supporting initiatives that preserved their heritage. Nijoni spoke of the plans they had for the future, including a project that would create a safe place for children who, like they once were, needed protection, care, and hope. Luke listened, amazed by their vision, their maturity, and the depth of thought they had put into every step. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Luke began to understand the full scope of what they had planned. They wanted to transform his ranch into a sanctuary, not just for animals as it had been, but for children who were vulnerable, lost, or in need of guidance. They had saved money over the years, acquired resources, and gathered knowledge to make it possible. Their idea was ambitious, but it was grounded in purpose, compassion, and gratitude. Luke felt a mixture of awe and humility. The girls he had once carried to safety were now bringing him an opportunity to extend the good he had done into the lives of many others. Luke thought about the river, the flood, and the terrified hands that had clung to him all those years ago. He remembered the fear, the struggle, and the triumph of that day. And now, 15 years later, he was witnessing the fruits of that single act of courage. The women before him had not only survived but had thrived, and they had chosen to honor him by using their strength to create something lasting and meaningful. The realization left him speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by gratitude, pride, and a sense of destiny fulfilled. The women then revealed the final part of their plan. They had purchased the necessary land and arranged for resources, all in secret, to ensure that Luke would have the choice to accept or decline without feeling pressured. They wanted him to retire from the daily grind of ranch work if he wished, while the sanctuary became a place where children could find safety, education, and hope. "We want this to be your legacy," Ita said softly. "A gift to the future, inspired by your courage and care." Luke felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had lived a life of simplicity, never seeking recognition or reward. And now, here were the two young lives he had saved, offering him a gift that transcended gratitude. It was a chance to continue making a difference in ways he had never imagined. Luke spent the rest of the day walking the grounds with Ida and Nijoni, showing them the barns, the fields, and the riverbank where the flood had occurred. He spoke of the animals, the soil, and the weather patterns he had learned over decades. In turn, the women discussed how each area could be used to benefit the sanctuary. They spoke of classrooms, safe shelters, gardens, and even programs to teach skills to children who had nowhere else to turn. Luke realized that their vision was practical, well thought out, and grounded in compassion. It was ambitious, but entirely achievable with dedication and careful planning. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plains, Luke felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had always loved the land, the animals, and the solitude of the ranch, but this connection, this shared purpose, was something entirely different. It was a reminder that life's most extraordinary moments often came from simple acts of courage, kindness, and trust. 15 years ago, he had risked his life to save two frightened girls. Now, those same lives were returning the favor in a way he could never have anticipated. That evening, they sat by the fire, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset. Luke listened as Ida and Nijoni shared stories of their childhood, their education, and the struggles they had overcome. They spoke with pride and humility, recognizing the challenges they had faced but also the strength they had gained. Luke realized that their journey had been long, difficult, and filled with obstacles, yet they had never forgotten the kindness that had shaped their lives. Their dedication to the sanctuary was a testament to that memory, a living tribute to the courage and compassion that had defined his actions so many years ago. The night grew quiet, with only the soft sounds of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote breaking the silence. Luke felt a sense of peace settle over him. He thought about the river, the flood, and the two small girls who had clung to him for safety. And he thought about the future, a future now filled with hope, purpose, and the promise of making a difference in countless lives. He realized that the bond between them was unbreakable, strengthened by time, trust, and shared experiences. Before they retired for the night, Ida and Nijoni made a final promise. They would return the next day with more concrete plans, sketches of the sanctuary, and details of how it could be managed. Luke nodded, his heart full. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the lives he had touched had grown to touch others. The circle of care, courage, and kindness had come full circle, and he was ready to be a part of it. As Luke lay in bed that night, listening to the soft wind across the plains, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events. A single act of bravery on a stormy day had rippled across time, creating connections, hope, and opportunities far beyond his imagination. The girls he had saved had returned, not as children, but as strong, determined women with a vision to honor him and create a lasting impact. Luke realized that life had a way of rewarding courage and kindness in unexpected, extraordinary ways. Sleep finally came, and Luke dreamed of the river, the plains, and the bright future ahead. He dreamed of children laughing, learning, and growing safely under the care of people who believed in them. He dreamed of Ita and Nijoni, guiding, planning, and creating a sanctuary that would stand as a testament to the power of one brave act. And he dreamed of himself, no longer just a solitary cowboy, but a part of something larger, something enduring, something truly remarkable. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold. Luke Harrison had risen early, as always, but this morning carried a weight of anticipation unlike any other. Ita and Nijoni were returning, this time with plans and details, ready to reveal the full extent of what they had envisioned. Luke could feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness stirring in him. Over the past 15 years, he had lived a quiet, solitary life on the plains, but now everything was about to change. Dusty snorted softly as the women approached along the familiar dusty trail. Luke stepped forward, his boots crunching in the dry soil, heart beating faster than usual. Ita's eyes met his, calm and determined, while Nijoni's sparkled with excitement and purpose. They were no longer the frightened girls clinging to him by the river. They were women of vision, courage, and resourcefulness. Luke felt a swell of emotion at the sight, a mixture of pride, nostalgia, and awe. Once seated on the porch, the women began to explain their plan in detail. They had saved money over the years, invested in resources, and sought advice from others who had experience with education, care, and community service. They wanted to transform Luke's ranch into something more than a home for livestock. It would become a sanctuary for children who had nowhere else to turn. They described spaces for learning, safe shelters, gardens, and programs to teach skills and knowledge to children from all walks of life. Luke listened intently, absorbing each word, feeling a sense of wonder at their thoughtfulness and determination. Ita spoke first, her voice calm and clear. "Luke, we've worked toward this for years. We've saved, planned, and prepared because we wanted to honor you and what you did for us. You risked your life to save us, and now we want to help you leave something behind, a legacy that will last beyond any one life." Luke felt a lump form in his throat. He had never sought recognition, never imagined that one act could grow into something so profound, but here it was, unfolding before him. Nijoni added softly, "We've seen what you can do for the land, for the animals, and for the people around you. Now we want to take that further. We want children to have a safe place to learn, to grow, and to know someone cares. You gave us life when we needed it most. Now we want to help others because of what you taught us, courage, kindness, and hope." Luke was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their words. He thought about the river, the fear, the rushing waters, and the small hands that had held his so tightly. He remembered the helplessness in their eyes, and the immense relief when they finally reached solid ground. And now, 15 years later, the children he had saved were giving back in a way that went beyond gratitude. They were offering him a chance to continue changing lives, to make a difference on a scale he had never imagined. The women spread out sketches, plans, and ideas, showing Luke exactly how the sanctuary would function. There were spaces for classrooms, gardens to grow food, shelters for sleeping, and areas where children could play safely. Every detail had been thought through with care. They explained how they had arranged for teachers, caretakers, and volunteers, ensuring that the project would be sustainable and successful. Luke felt a sense of awe and disbelief. The girls he had rescued as children had grown into women capable of such vision and generosity. As they spoke, Luke realized something remarkable. The bond they shared had not been broken by time. It had only grown stronger. Their trust in him, their gratitude, and their determination to honor his actions created a connection that transcended years and distance. He could feel it in every gesture, every word, and every look. He knew in his heart that this was more than a plan or a gift. It was a continuation of a story that had begun with courage, fear, and hope by the river all those years ago. Luke spent the afternoon walking the ranch with them, pointing out the areas that could be adapted for the sanctuary. He showed them where the flood had nearly taken their lives, where he had pulled them to safety, and where they had camped in those first days. The women listened intently, asking questions, taking notes, and imagining how each space could serve a new purpose. Luke felt pride and awe, watching them transform his familiar land into a vision of hope and care. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard work, was about to become a center of life, learning, and community. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plains, Aida and Nijoni turned to Luke with a mixture of anticipation and humility. "Luke," Ida said softly, "we want you to have a choice. This sanctuary can be yours to guide, or we can manage it while you enjoy the life you've earned. You don't have to work another day if you don't want to, but we hope you'll be a part of this because it started with you." Luke's chest tightened. He had spent years alone, used to solitude and the quiet rhythm of ranch life. The idea of letting go, of leaving the daily work behind, was both strange and comforting. He realized that this gift was not only for the children or the land, but for him as well, a chance to rest, reflect, and witness the impact of his own courage extended across time. He looked at Ida and Nijoni, seeing the determination in their eyes, the care in their gestures, and the love that had grown from the bond they shared. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and joy. Finally, Luke nodded, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "I trust you," he said quietly. "I've spent my life on this land, but I can see now that it's meant for more than just me. If you can make it work, I want to be part of it. And if you need me, I'll be here wherever I'm needed." Ida and Nijoni smiled, tears glistening in their eyes. Nijoni reached over and gently squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of thanks and connection. The next weeks were filled with planning, preparation, and construction. Luke watched in amazement as Ida and Nijoni worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. Volunteers arrived, drawn by the story of the brave cowboy and the two women he had saved. Slowly, the ranch transformed. New buildings were constructed, gardens planted, and classrooms organized. The land, once quiet and solitary, was now alive with activity, laughter, and hope. Luke felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. The bond formed so many years ago had blossomed into something extraordinary, a sanctuary that would change countless lives. The day finally came when the first children arrived. Luke stood at the gate, watching as small faces, some fearful, some curious, stepped onto the land. He remembered Ida and Nijoni as children, and now they were guiding these new lives, offering safety, warmth, and education. The air was filled with laughter, stories, and the quiet hum of discovery. Luke felt tears prick at his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of life coming full circle. As the sun set over the plains, Luke sat on the porch, Dusty resting nearby, and watched the children play. Ida and Nijoni joined him, their smiles reflecting pride and joy. "It's more than I imagined," Luke said softly. Ida shook her head gently. "No, Luke, it's what you started." "We just helped it grow," Nijoni added. "You saved us once, and now you're helping save so many more." Luke realized then that life often worked in ways that were beyond understanding. A single act of courage, performed without expectation, had created ripples across time. Those ripples had grown into a wave of hope, compassion, and change. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the two girls he had rescued had returned not only to honor him, but to carry forward a legacy of kindness and courage. Night fell, the sky full of stars, and the plains quieted once more. Luke looked around, seeing the life, hope, and promise that had blossomed from one day of bravery. He knew that this was the culmination of years of courage, trust, and perseverance. A story that had begun with fear and danger, but had grown into something truly remarkable. 15 years after that fateful day, Luke Harrison understood the true meaning of legacy, connection, and the power of a single act to change lives forever. And in that quiet moment, under the vast, starry sky of the Southwest Plains, Luke smiled, feeling gratitude, pride, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The girls he had saved had returned, yes, but they had returned not just with thanks, but with action, vision, and love, creating a future that honored the past and promised hope for generations to come.